Blessings and welcome forward to Reasonings right here at the Trail Life. I'm your host, Jerome Sage Butler, just chilling right above my home in the bamboo paradise. This is where I chill out, From when I was a child, I used to hang out here and just, commune with the ancestors, and just have a good time just with nature and just hold a meditation. As I got forward into Christ, I just came here to pray and, hold a little smoke and look out and, give thanks. And yeah, I'm here today to shoot this video right here, so I feel comfortable to bring you into this very nice and comfortable personal environment in nature. I hang out, right above my home, and I'm very comfortable here because, like I said, I grew up here, and I know, like me, there are a lot of people who have these nice, comfortable places that we take for granted, and every so often we remember how beautiful they are, and then we find that we have to spend some time in that space and in that place and just hold a clear, meditation, focus on something beautiful, something honest, something truthful, recapture some of the wonderful moments of our lives, because probably sometimes you've forgotten about some beautiful things, and just being in a different environment just sometimes just sparks you to remember some of the wonderful experiences you've had and, feel good about the life you're living and, remember that God is always with you and God will never leave you. Yeah, that's my little drink, just in case you're wondering, not littering the environment. And I got my little camera bag and, all the other stuff that, makes it possible to shoot in the environment. Because I know we do share a lot of space in nature and we cannot leave like this very unclean trail because naturally that's going to make it unhealthy for the environment and hence unhealthy for us. So we're keeping the balance, right? So no surprises, right? Yes, and I got my little boom box in a white box. If the camera should pan on it, that's what it is. Yeah. Okay, so today's offering I'm going to be, relating on is one that is kind of very close to a lot of the current movements currently, and people have placated themselves on either side of the argument, and sometimes I feel like, it's a matter of both, but then sometimes people have to be very clear about how we balance the equation of the collective consciousness and personal identity. Yes, you had to look, for the topic because I had to write it down, because sometimes you have it in mind, but then you want to structure it appropriately. So I had to write it down. The collective consciousness and personal identity. So essentially, let's get to the flow. Essentially, we are peopled by the collective, and that manifests through the individuality of our parents coming together to make the offspring. And the socialization of life is very much the same along those paradigms, right? So the collective consciousness has had its great part or plays one of the greatest role in shaping your personal viewpoint of life and informing your personal identity. And as most individual evolves through time and the experience of the family and community, it becomes even more natural for one to suggest that, your sense of who you are is informed by the experiences, the encounters, the connections you've had within the living environment, the collective consciousness manifesting as your family, events within your family, your community, within your region, within your nation. And this then informs how it is you view yourself and view your world, your life. Wherein there is a conflict between the collective consciousness and the personal identity is where the modern scope begins to broaden its spectrum within our lives. The modern scope now shows us that individuality, the personal identity, is not necessarily based upon the collective consciousness or the collective awareness. So we are going to examine these tenets and see what truths are there within both arguments and see if we are indeed better holding on to collective consciousness leading to personal identity, or personal identity annexed of collective consciousness. Or then we can go a step further to suggest that will the collective conscious in the future be just based upon individual likes and dislikes. So we address these issues in the potentate of consciousness and see how it is that we, through the power of Yahuwah the Divine Christ, in our lives, in my mental and emotional faculties, can lead me to spark consciousness, a word, a thought, a process that might be of help. All of us are products of our environment. If we are socialized in a Christian environment, And depending on the level of participation of our parents, a lot of our collective consciousness will be informed by the Christian moral and viewpoints on life. And the edicts and the behaviors that are promoted within your church circle, family environment within these religious ways of life, especially in a Christian viewpoint. Moral, ethics, decorum, and decency are fundamental tenets of a proper socialization and maturity or matriculation in an emotional sense into the greater populace or into the sense of a personal identity. Our family, how our parents, our mother and father, or brothers or siblings if we have any, or cousins if we are in an extended family situation, or just a communal family. That informs the kind of identity we hold. So if the communal family, the organized nature of that family, promotes things that are harmonious, respectful, just, and kind, and have ways of being respectful in terms of being able to understand situations and even to go beyond their own limitations of understanding, growing in forgiveness and even in mercy, being human yet being able to understand that there are mistakes being made and that there are mitigations or corrections. So if that true family spirit, communal spirit, is informed by a righteous and divine nature, Christian in moral, or just moral in nature, ethical in nature, then one can suggest that one would be proud of that collective consciousness aiding, being the rooting for your personal identity. You will then evolve into a Christian way of life, into a way of life driven and led by deep centered morals in a Christ viewpoint, a Christ-like consciousness, a Christ-like state of being. And if the family is very involved in communal activities within the community, within the spectrum of helping their fellow individuals within the church and the church family and the community, then you would have a kind of a socialization and understanding that giving of charity, helping others in terms of a humanitarian, would be something natural in your socialization. It would then be easier for you to offer from yourself something of that conscious nature, of that loving and genuine nature, something born in how you socialize. So then when you are then identifying yourself within the broader spectrum of the life in the society, it is then easier for you to then say, well, I am a Christian, I am a follower of Christ, or I am a believer in that which is just, moral, honest, or truthful. And more than just a postulation, you would then have the concurrent behaviors to then fulfill your divine pronunciations or just your declarations in attitudes, right? So as we go further in understanding that the collective then would then manifest as your personal identity. So I, being Jerome Marshall Lockby Butler, would then be proud to say, well, I'm a proud follower of Christ, and then my lifestyle would be in line and congregant to a Christ-like way of living, because that would be synonymous with the way and means of how I've been socialized. Now, understanding the complexities of human life, we realize that not all of our experiences are based on the ideal or what seems succinct. It is also based upon some of the traumatic and negative experiences that we've been having. And as such, they inform the consciousness as well. So wearing that they are not too out of sync or out of sorts with something that can be of a clarified understanding, one can then see that even your traumatic experiences can strengthen your collective view by the fact that if in such situations you would have found a support system in the family or in the extended family, the church family, communal family, the family of the community, then you could then be fulfilled to understand that in your moment of need, the environment, the community, the sense of love has found true form in the aid that has come to you from these individuals. So then you'll be proud to say, well, I'm a follower of Christ, and you give back to your community and add back in fulfilling ways. And this would be a proud example or proud manifestations of just natural law, divine law, and just a law of being. Now, let's examine the negatives as presented to us of collective identity, collective consciousness informing personal identity, before we get to just examining personal identity and next of any connections to collective consciousness. Now, some of the negatives of the personal identity mechanism, where it relates to being informed wholly from the collective. Our collective are mostly traditional and are functional based intelligence. It is what they've seen done over generations upon generations, and somewhere in the early parts of that genealogy there were some standards established because of experience. So experiential living, whether purely on the physical, natural, or the psychological, spiritual planes of existence, causes the gene of the family of the gene, to think sociologically, psychologically a particular way, and create outward traditions and functions to maintain their heightened or their clarified states or their experiential states of existence. This hands down as tradition. Now it happens also in religious culture, it happens just in secular culture as well too. So when the collective is informed by these notions, these functionalities that have been generationally perpetuated, and aren't necessarily based in absolute truth, but the sociological, the psychological, or the environmental issues facing our ancestors. And through evolution, one would suggest the growth of time and experience would change some of those primal directives in behaviors, but they won't change because they have been inculcated so deeply into the psyche over generations that those informing the collective consciousness, those forms of thoughts and emotionals, well, they are mostly mostly emotional based. They're really a thought based because they're thought based when we become conscious of them, because they're so subtext, subconscious, that they are really deep primal stirrings that still, evolve with us and affect our functionality on the outer plane. So these informing our collective consciousness, they are well accepted because they've been handed down over generations, and such has been accepted as a part of the function of who we are. Now, a lot of these things rather aren't based in actual fact or in functionality for the present age. We have evolved past them. Wherein they're not based in morals and ethics that are truly transposed to now, then we can dispose of them, because what they would have maintained is a sense of fear and a sense of superstition and a sense of misunderstanding and a sense of lack of information. And now that there's this age of, exploding information, then I know a lot of people are coming into context and coming into contact with this information, with varied information, which challenges the collective consciousness as how it has been given to us, especially descendants of, indigenous people all across the planet. We have found that we have been educated by people who have invaded, who have had consciousnesses in the ways of life that has not harmonized with the true nature of how we have lived for millennia. So it is proven to us that we now know that there are a lot of these practices that are not wholesome, and as such they are harmful in terms of the present generation understands that and are not evolving into them because of Satanism or because of some dark myriad craziness, but they are also parts of the moral, ethical fabric of our lives, and they've been twisted by fear, and fear that has been generational. And so that these, devotions, these rituals, these rites have been made to these entities or to a certain kind of life, and they have evolved as practices that we maintain today. So those practices, in the light of truth and the revelation of the Most High and information, has proven to not be succinct to the kind of life we want to live now. And this isn't a life, again, based in the battery. So this is the internet. We have to be very careful how we present information. I'm becoming very much aware of that. So in this present age, I'm not talking about the information that defames God or that tries to pollute or pervert our sense of well-being as human beings, but information that, as I say, for especially indigenous people, we've all been lied to, whether we are indigenous or not. But especially for indigenous people, because as we try to find ourselves and we're searching through all this information, and we begin to realize that, okay, so a lot of the stuff that our grandparents were taught about themselves are really not true. And in order to get back to an undiluted truth, even if you go back to a couple generations to when you were free and having your own thoughts, our ancestors were free and having their own thoughts, you'd see that there were practices that they condone within the consciousness and the presence of their age that was not truthful, wholesome, or even beneficial. So we have to be honest about that, because we have inherited it genetically, and it has come across as sociological and psychological behaviors. And I know there are lots of psychologists who would say that a lot of these behaviors show up in our most violent moments or almost broken and detached moments when this reality is cracked open. We see the debauchery of some collective demon manifest itself through the manifestation of some weird behaviors that are in an individual, And for some reason, as I said, for generations, these thought processes were fed, and there were altars made to maintain these entities and to entertain their presence within the lives of the family. So these curses carry on, and they affect the personal identity. So there are lots of individuals who are not educated who are moving away from that, and they're scared their grandparents or even their parents, because sometimes it seems so radical and drastic. So I just want to say to such an individual, find the anchorage in the truth of divine Yeshua and see wherein your ancestors were rooted in truth, and do not just step aside from them because you found negativity, but find an understanding as to, pray over your ancestry and cover their misunderstandings, because it transmits through you today, so you can be that example of the restoration of something that is truthful and honest and wholesome within your line, your lineage, right? So for those who are troubled by the collective that has given them these images of morbidity, of maybe something even sacrilegious, but they love their parents and they love their family, and we want to relate to them in a manner that is succinct with where we are and how we understand. And I think we are very much clear in the functions of what morals and ethics are, and how it is that our identity are informed by truly the good and the bad of our conditions, wanted to mitigate or to just transmute bad into good and see just good go into greater, into the best possible experiences. Our identity can then manifest and fulfill the needs that we see that are apparent within our conditions. So part of, I would say, personal identity, to have a vision of yourself and to have a mission in life or a purpose in life, believe it or not, to me a lot has to do with the collective. And because when you see the tenets of hurt, of brokenness in the collective, then you begin to understand that there is a need. And you see where your knowledge, your experiences are congruent with what is necessary to restore what is broken within your ancestry. And that is something that is apparent in the present day reality. And these dreams we hold, I think, are greatly furnished by the collective. So let us know when we are making our choices, how they are informed by what is presented before us and what we have researched and found to be correct. But let our actions not be so drastic that we disharmonize our family lineage, so that that which we have learned through generations can continue. Because if we break that line, we break the nature of the flow of the Spirit of the Most High. We have to remember what is good and what is beautiful and give more life to that so it can stay within us, however we identify ourselves, and feel proud to be present within life and have a mission or be able to fulfill some kind of mandate, personal drive or ambition, whichever way it is that you have structured your consciousness to be aware of such an idea making sense to you. So the collective consciousness informing your personal identity in both spectrum of both being beneficial and non-beneficial by some of the brokenness it has held, is correctable by the fact of your thinking, and how it is that you as an individual can see what has been wrong with your ancestral lineage, what has been wrong with your perception, with the perception in the family lineage, and how it is that now you as an individual can correct that, not just in radicalization of your thought processes or some, weird life pattern, but be able to be conscious. And if it is that you know that something is wrong and you can see it and sense it and know it from now your acceptance of the kind of quality of truth that you have now begun to understand, then you can now grow in the understanding of truth that it is not boastful, neither is it that rash, neither is it that brash, or is it that sassy. It is far more calm. It has a sense of protection, of nurturing. And as such, when you find that there's been a disparity in how the collective has been informed, in all truthfulness, you would want to repair. You'd want to add clarity. And that would just be a mere formality. You would want to do it in the most decent and heartwarming of ways, because you would have known how it would have shaped a lot of people's reality, how it would have transfigured a lot of people's reality in not so positive ways in a lot of sense and a lot of times. So let's now look at personal identity and next of anything collective. I have already alluded to the fact that many people are now being informed in the reality that we've been misinformed, misled, and downright lied to by a lot of the educational formats and structures and systemization that we have been inculcated into, that has been inculcated into us. So we find that a lot of the collective consciousness, not just within the social spectrum, but within religiosity and religious nation, within the religious nations, and I mean right across the spectrum of what religion has been, we've found that there's been a lot of controls in the clergy, in the clerics, and in these senior figures that have not maintained any kind of life that is truly wholesome or beneficial to us as a collective, as a nation of God, under God, the children of God. So I know that the rhetoric in all religion leading to a collective perception is somewhat unifying to a degree to the peoples within those religions, and is unifying to a degree in the ethics and moral of all nations, right, or within all man. But in their actuality, the functionaries don't always uphold this holy moral tradition. So what we are finding is there are loopholes that have been exploited by these men of religious nobility, religious qualification, and their information informing political and social life, socialization of just the society, has driven a lot of people to lose their minds, to be murdered, entire generations and ethnic groups to be wiped out of existence, or to be practically murdered into subjugation or depopulated into subjugation, whichever word fits you. I'm not trying to be crude, but please remember that language is somewhat of a limitation as well too, and as such I'm always trying to choose the words as appropriately as I can. So this collective consciousness through religiosity over generations has caused a lot of people to suffer most dishearteningly, and caused the complete annexing of complete nations and the destruction of family line and lineage and patterns of living that goes back to prehistory, to the dawn of time. And as such, there are a generation amongst us who are being informed by the truth of such debauchery and how it is that these powerful individuals have designed societies to hurt us. Now, the spirit of the Most High is truthful and genuine. My view of the religious consciousness, before I complete my argument, is that the Most High is a divine truth, and a human being has built institutions around the truth, and we call them religion. And as generation goes on, we postulate, and then we change, and then we redress, and then we refract, and then we project, and all these manner of thinking. And it's always around the fact of the divine truth abstracted into our perceptions and opinions. Now, depending on how much you have given up of your life in terms of the ideology of the clergy to the cloth, or to the word, or to the argument, or to the study of the theories and the dogmas that are maintained within these structures, the kind of lifestyle that is then promoted by these people who are then, were rather mostly isolated, are somewhat cushioned within the structures of society, and certainly in the structures of these religions, they are detached from understanding the life of the average person. So when they come and put these far-flung notions of clarity, of religiosity, on the people, it's really just control. And the people are now becoming informed to know that it is control, and they're resisting against such control. And alas, there are a lot of people who are saying, oh, these people are resisting against God and are taken on to Satan. And I think it's just one broad brush that's trying to paint everyone, and that's erroneous. Because a lot of these people are moving away from the control of power-hungry, bloodthirsty men. And I don't think God has come into the argument as yet. Now, in the lower consciousness, trying these men, so-called men of God, to some is trying God. But as the presence of the divine comes as clarity, then one knows that's not the truth. That would not be the case. That these men are tried according to their actions, their perceptions, and how they have allowed their perceptions to actualize upon others, not just themselves. So they'll be held accountable. Yah is not being held accountable. It is up to you to see truth. So the people are not accusing God. In the greater context, they're accusing the clergy. They're accusing the clerics. They're accusing these crazy, non-functional religious characters that are inciting violence on a heavy scale. And that kind of violence-based consciousness, informing the collective consciousness, then informing the collective environment, then informing the collective identity, to then inform the personal identity. There are a lot of generations coming afoot that are saying, hell no way. And they're saying, pull away. Pull away from such a structure that is so intensely controlling that the God-given presence is lost in these functionalities, lost within these bureaucracies. And then we begin to recognize that a new age of personal identity is not just all based in Satan, or a hell of a good time, or a hell of a good life, or Satanism. It is based in the truth that the word says, come out of her, my people. Come out of her. Who is her? Mystery Babylon. A culture and a civilization that's devoid of truth or of genuine love, of anything that is wholesome or beneficial. Its pundits are many. The manifestations thereof are quantum. So it is, inherent upon us who are, I would say, shifting away from the personal identity based upon these collective functionalities and programming that is obviously not based in truth. I again would inform you, I think you should look at the spectrum of truth a little bit more. We understand where you're coming from. We understand that we ourselves who are seeing it as a balance, knowing that the truth must be heard, must be spoken, must be understood, also recognize that within these traditions, your ancestry, your generations that have been following Christ, or have been following a proper way of life, had invested a lot, not just in terms of belief system, but in terms of blood, sweat, and tears in maintaining a path of understanding. And if you have, through time, come to greater clarity, then it's upon you to teach your generation and share. And if you want to know, that's why we do it. That's why I do it. Because I listen to the religious functionaries. I listen to those who are driven by the Spirit of the Most High. I know there's truth and there's lie everywhere. There are lies in people doing this stuff like me too, and there are lies in those people who are on those pulpits or on those programs who are well-funded or minimally funded too. There are lies everywhere and there's truth everywhere. But what I learned is that because we've recognized that there's this disparity, we want to add some value or some amount of information so that our generations won't perish. So there are lots of things, lots of judgments which are born in these collective ideologies would affect a lot of generations like myself, because we are not trying to say we understand everything about life. In one thing I know, because I pay attention to religious radio and religious thinkers, I know that I would not be considered a Christian. And I know also that's why I don't use the terminology Christian, because I know these things are like branding. Because if you notice this world order, the church is under it as well too. So Christ is not the church as how it has been given to us. It is the temple of the living, which is the heart, which is the living being, which is how your morals and your ethics will fashion that personal identity. But because we understand these things, we are trying our best through this medium to manifest an understanding which functions beyond some of the previous social constructs or socializing constructs that we were taught, in the sense of miseducating us or trying to really distract us from our true natures. So smoking is not something, smoking of marijuana I'm talking about, it's not something that is tolerated a lot in Christian, it's tolerated in Christian consciousness. What am I talking about? Tolerated a lot. But a lot of Christian musicians say smoke. And the issue is that that's not spoken about, but that's not justification. What I'm saying is that the fact of people using substances to have some form of shifting is something, shifting in the spirit and the presence I'm talking about. Christians, how it has been taught to us, will reject that. There are arguments of early Christians using mushrooms and other trance-based hallucinogenics to, go into the spiritual world. But as we say, there's been this evolution of this kind of a functionality of Christian thought, and as such, it's so organized that you go up against a wall of intellectual darkness and whatever to try to understand these clerics, these theologists and their functionaries and their functionalities. but the experience of Yeshua is true. So, so as not to lose my soul within the mistranslation and the plethora of information, I do these videos so people can understand. So I learn. I pay attention to the prophecies, and I pay attention to all the pundits, all the people who are speaking that genuine word. So I know that the collective still has a place in my personal choices, but I know a lot of times I hear religious people say some stuff that relates right back to the enemy, and I could not agree with it because it's so wrapped up so beautifully in this salubrious word that is spoken on these networks. And because we have already been swayed by the presence of Christ in our own lives, we will open up ourselves to listen to these things. And there are lots of Christians who are saying, well, Jerome, that's the same thing we're doing to you. That is why Christ would say the wheat and the tares grow together till the day of harvest. Because that's the reason why one has to just be oneself. So I know there are complexities in understanding an individual. Am I trying to be like I'm a hero here? Is that what this is about? But our identities have a lot to do with how we will live, what honors us and what we honor. So for those who are holding to a collective identity solely, and for those who are holding to a personal identity solely, I say, begin to let go of your fears a little and see how both informs each other. So for those who are squirrel, as I said, still on the argument of personal identity, you've been well informed now, you've been very educated in perception and in the understanding that a lot of the perceptions that we've been given have been marred by a lot of lies, mistranslation, misunderstanding, and downright deception. And if you begin to understand that this is the case, then I do understand that a lot of you are not thinking about anything that sounds like the prophecies, that remotely sounds like something our ancestors have spoken about. And by ancestors, I mean by our grandparents, of telling us of the coming age of the Christ, of that 1,000-year reign of righteousness, after which this grand beast of perdition will abound. Is that what your identity is wrapped up in? A lot of the older folks' identity is wrapped up in that. But a lot of the modern folks' identity is wrapped up, let me take a break here, in materialism. It's wrapped up in what one can gain to so-called sustain in this present reality. And as such, that identity, that personal identity born in the go get what I can get, that's not beneficial. Because that's a short-sighted view of the collective responsibility we share. That each one reach one, each one teach one, each one affects one in this living cosmos. You are not a bubble of air that's floating on an endless ocean of nothing. Everything else relates, connects, and has an attachment to each other. Now, through bitterness, misunderstanding, and going over onto the looser things of morals or the lesser things of virtue, we have created socialized patterns that are unhealthy, unwholesome, and the identity which are born from it are not the most beautiful identities, and people are wrapped up in complexes, in all manner of persuasions, orientations, and are placated along such thought processes, hardened to defend their individualistic point of view. And I wonder, weren't you coming from the same ethereal, biological stream, the genetic ancestral flow that has come from the first Adam to the second Adam? Isn't this a stream of eternal nature, of eternal DNA, of which you are from, the progeny of the divine? So how is it now that life has become just about this moment, detached and unattached and so removed? The Beatitudes are of genuine virtue and value. They are not some subversive mechanism to make individuals feel proud. Get in tune to the Beatitudes. Inform a personal identity that has collective responsibility. And for those in the collective should understand also that you should be informing the personal identities and should be informed by the personal identities. So listen to the great pioneers, the great patriarchs and matriarchs that are setting a standard amongst us. And that standard is to be revered as Christ has set the ultimate standard. And those who follow in that footstep should be respected, and the ethics, the moral abstractions thereof are the building block, the teaching tools that would transmute the truth of Christ through generations to generations to generations. And then one can truly be proud to say, my personal identity is in Yeshua, is in Yahuwah, is in the anciency of our culture, of understanding our indigenous nature. First cause, first effect, lasting effect. The divine nature manifesting as your life, as clarity of perception. Give yourself that chance to learn from both spectrum of the argument. And for those who are squarely collective-minded, I remind you that individuals often inform the collective. I also remind you that oftentimes the collective rejects against individuals, even Yeshua. And we see the end result of the debauchery by such rejection, that such rejection has caused. And for those who are learning and knowing that the presence of the divine in you isn't just some ideology, but something that is genuine, functional, and is real, and your connection to it is your devotion, is how willing you are to allow your identity, your behaviors, your habits to be informed from divine nature. So let us learn to love and trust each other, decently care for each other, decently take care of each other, both in the collective consciousness and in the personal identity, in the individualistic consciousness. Let us harmonize like the bottle cap covers the bottle, which is the content of the entire community. If you be in the bottle cap, then be secure. Be the securer, the one that makes sure that all the contents of the community's knowledge is encased and protected in the genealogy and the behavior of your communal member. Love your family, which is the first building block, starting with self, family to mate, and as you mate, intimate, and put together the offsprings. May they come together to respect the collective and genuinely feel free to manifest a personal identity that is wholesome, not one that is serving darkness, but one that is truly serving light. I hope my offering can and is of help to you as you perceive and look into how it is that you have been informed by the collective consciousness, how it is that you have drunk it in wholly without truly examining it, if it's completely true. And how it is that you on the individualistic spectrum have just discounted information because you've heard or you're finding out how religion or how governments have subverted information, have even inculcated wrong practices. But these are warfare, soft warfare, along with brutal warfare and invasive cultures and practices that have caused problems over the generations. But let us, by the grace of Yahuwah, overcome these and be clean, moral, healthy, happy, and wholesome in our collective and our personal identity. May they all be informed by the presence of Yah. Love, honor, and blessings to you. Continue to follow us on Tree of Life Television Network. I am Jerome Sage Butler, reasoning at the Tree of Life in the mountain. Please remember that you're a blessed gift of personal and collective responsibility to us, to yourself, and to all who come in contact with you. Continue to be this beautiful responsibility of love, joy, and prosperity. Blessings to you, honor, always. Until we meet again.